Hello, my name is Major Mike Webb, and 1 year ago, minus a day, we filed in the Circuit Court for the City of Alexandria the very first challenge against the lockdowns in Virginia in defense of the Free Exercise Clause and your right to worship. And on that same day, over 2,000 sailors were being offloaded from installation housing on the island territory of Guam from the Nimitz-class aircraft carrier USS Theodore Roosevelt. No one could have anticipated that 1 year later, the nation's only physician serving as a state governor would still be evading the sheriff of the city of Alexandria in contempt of court to be held accountable for being responsible for unlawfully closing businesses and churches and placing citizens under false arrest, as well as closing schools. Or that events in the Pacific, on the other side of the world, might be somehow connected beyond what had been described as a universal condition of pandemic crisis and a novel coronavirus bigger than God. And yet, just days later, another seemingly random event would occur as George Stephanopoulos, the former communications director for former President Bill Clinton, would raise an issue leaking potentially sensitive information regarding surreptitiously intercepted communications of the Chinese Communist Party, and under a claim to former Defense Secretary Mike Esper that President Donald K. Trump had been aware of an emerging public health crisis in China as early as November 2019 and had failed to prepare and warn the American people. No one in the press seemed to even notice the breach of potentially sensitive information being broadcasted on the airwaves, nor did even any defense analyst in the news raise the superseding authority that would have prevented any intelligence products from the Defense Department being shared with others outside the military under the Posse Comitatus Act. But we did take notice at that time, even as the story quickly disappeared from the headlines, and which is only now beginning to resurface in the wake of the latest attempt by the World Health Organization to reinforce the zoonotic evolution theory for a novel coronavirus, in refuting claims of conspiracy regarding a biological weapon being deployed. Yet, the seemingly scientific theory is a theory that no amount of actual science can validate. But when dealing with truth, perseverance is always required for patience and time, and diligent efforts on multiple fronts, pressing the U.S. Navy on the actions of Captain Brett Crozier, recently resulted in the reprimand of the Naval Academy graduate in February for failure to adhere to social distancing, which by all reports, in what can only be described as panic by a senior officer in the face of no life-threatening condition, ordering the suspension of social distancing protocols aboard his vessel under claim that he had simply assumed that all of his men had been infected, with the tragic result, if that is true to be, a highly contagious disease which no science supports, the tragic result of what has been estimated to be the infections of over 2/3 of his crew, based upon serologic samples and the death of one. Crozier had been relieved of command last April, not long after his decision to circumvent his chain of command in a scheme involving efforts to use senior defense officials to violate the Third Amendment, intimidating territorial government officials on Guam to reopen their economy to permit the quartering of his crew in luxury hotels. And we are continuing to press for an Article 32 investigation to compel his court-martial. However, the latest report regarding the report on zoonotic evolution, long awaited from the World Health Organization, contained at least one Easter egg for the Lenten season. Because in addition to a 120-page report filled with colorful graphs that still yet left unresolved many questions regarding a potential laboratory origin for a novel coronavirus, the researchers dedicated an entire section regarding whether the pandemic pathogen had been present in the population longer than had been acknowledged by the Beijing regime, who had announced its arrival at the end of December 2019. And an extensive analysis of over 76,000 medical records, searching diligently for reports of symptoms that might find a potential similarity to those exhibited in COVID-19. going all the way back to September, definitively determined that there was no evidence, absolutely no evidence of the disease in China before December, directly challenging the claims of George Stephanopoulos and ABC News, who had claimed that communications intercepts had been recovered as early as November, which on all medical evidence could only have been communications regarding an effort to deploy a biological weapon of terror, as we have claimed in multiple litigations in December. Around the same time that the People's Liberation Navy was launching its second of only 2 aircraft carriers that would take dominance later of the Pacific, upon the retreat by Captain Crozier aboard the USS Theodore Roosevelt, an event coincident with the outbreak aboard the USS Ronald Reagan, the other aircraft carrier covering the region from which he had recently departed, and resulting in a shift in the dominance of naval power in the Pacific, compelling the withdrawal of forward-deployed strategic bombers on the island of Guam, actions about which President Joe Biden, as a candidate, had to have been aware, but for which he had praised Captain Crozier, recommending for him a commendation and rejecting his punishment, being relieved from command of that naval vessel. Around the same time, after an examination of early reports regarding a novel coronavirus, we had raised concerns about a migration analysis that had been prepared by Moss Labs and included in WHO Situation Report number 3, published on January 23, 2020. But perhaps far more preoccupied with collecting over 33,000 signatures for his petition to appear on the ballot, Senator Mark Warner, now the chairman of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, chose to ignore an intelligence estimate that had confirmed multiple migration variants for a novel coronavirus that appeared to demonstrate a pathogen not proceeding upon epidemiological models, but rather in accordance with strategic and tactical considerations. Only now is he willing to admit, as of December, that China represents the greatest threat to American national security and interest. Any scientist is well aware that because viruses represent the most abundant biological particles in the world, but before COVID-19 had only produced 220 harmful to mankind, that they are the least likely pathogen community to be a candidate for an emerging disease. Any scientist is well aware that coronaviruses are both the largest family and largest class, the largest in mass of viruses, and by virtue of mass are the most unstable and prone to rapid mutation developments. But despite this evolutionary advantage, had failed to produce any outside those found within the cocktail mixture of pathogens discovered by scientists in the 1960s, totaling only 4, which all appeared to be to most resemble chicken coronaviruses, just as any scientist would have found it odd that both SARS and MERS, which began to emerge first in 2003 in Hong Kong, were not chicken-like, but actual bat coronaviruses, similar in genome sequence to bat coronaviruses in Guangdong, the only location in the world where scientists today admit they have been able to cultivate a new pathogen in vitro. Bat coronavirus is very similar to the one now threatening the world, and at least, ironically, those bat coronaviruses are co-located in a military-grade virology lab in China. Yet none of these facts are discussed at all in the latest Zoonotic Evolution report about a public health threat for which even to date there is no validated secondary attack rate, nor infectious dose known for a disease that has to date been attributed to the deaths of over 500,000 Americans, with over 10,000 in the Commonwealth of Virginia, where we have the nation's only physician serving as a state governor, and over half of those fatalities are the elderly in nursing homes, a known risk from the very beginning. And so here is the truth. My name is Major Mike Webb, and by God, I am running for governor of Virginia. I ask every Virginian and every American true to, like the motto of the infantry, follow me, and we shall overcome. Honest. And y'all come back now. Here.
I am a seeker, and you are a keeper. You are a teacher, won't you teach me the way? the shelter of your care each day. 'Cause I am a seeker.
This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb.
You are a leader, won't you show me the way? You are a leader, won't you show me the way?
And y'all come back now. Him,